Happy Worthy Women Wednesday. So excited for this episode today with Alli Pittser. She is someone who is very close to me. I actually get to see Alli basically every single day, whether she likes it or not, I call her. So Alli is a social media expert and so much more. She has been there in my own life as I have really taken my social media to the next level, and she's helped me do some posts and really helped me make it look clean and grammar, let's be honest. Let's get some grammar and some spelling checks in there too. But really, like, Alli is so much more than that to me. She is someone who's also survived abuse and has come through on the other side so strong and powerful. And I know a lot about Alli's story, but I'm actually even excited for this interview because I don't know if I know it all. So without any other ado, like, Alli, will you tell us about yourself? And thank you so much for being on here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited. It's weird knowing that I'm on Facebook Live, but not being able to see the comments because I'm always on like the other side of it where I get to like, and stuff like that. So yeah, this is fun. Thanks for having me. So I was born and raised in Arizona, actually. I was raised by my dad. My dad and mom's relationship was kind of rocky. So my dad had a girlfriend for about 8 years, and I call her mom. She's my best friend and like rock. And I love her so much. But growing up, my dad was in a band, and I just like always fell into the marketing role. Like it's just something I've always been a natural at. And so growing up, I was interested in two things, like marketing and music. And my two worlds like came together when I started my job at iHeartRadio. And I learned how to do social media for all the greats and do all that really fun stuff. And right after I got my job at iHeart, actually, I was assaulted in my home. So my story kind of like took a weird shift, and things that I thought I was living for, I wasn't necessarily living for anymore. So it was a really weird time. So looking back, I'm like, it almost feels like some weird, like I'm disconnected from it a little bit. So it's kind of, to sum it all up, that's kind of who I am and how I got to this point. So
yeah, which there's so much more, and I cannot wait to ask all these amazing questions that not only your really close friends have asked you throughout the years and have asked you since they knew you were going to be on this interview, and also just like hear more about your story, Alli, because like, yes, like it sounds like you went through this amazing time of like, hey, I'm meeting all these important people and excited about life and doing something that you loved. And then having that day where everything really shattered and having to build back up afterwards. So can we just start a little bit, just really start about like the abuse, just because, yes, I want people to know like what you went through because of where you're at now, and to encourage everyone that like you've gone through so much and you're still able to show up for yourself and for your family, and to encourage them in that way. So can you tell us a little bit more just about what you've been through?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of my story begins probably like in childhood and things like that. My dad, he's great, and he's super charismatic, and he's super loving, like almost to a fault, very unconditional. But he has like this other side to him that not many people got to know. And if they like, I remember when I applied for, I was applying for college, and I remember I had like one of my high school teachers write me a letter of recommendation because I moved out when I turned 18. It was like a month after I turned 18. I was still in high school. And so I was trying to get emancipated through the school and like apply for college and do all these things. And I remember I was like, can you just write a letter and talk about how my dad was this way? And she's like, I had no idea. So obviously I was super good at hiding it and super good at not talking about it. And it's still something to this day that like people, maybe the people like closest to me would know, but not necessarily stuff that I've talked about. But once I was assaulted by a different family member, like 8 years ago, that's when I really started realizing like all the trauma and all the triggers and like all of that stuff that I had been through. So, and that one was like probably what caused me to do the most healing and do the most work on myself, even as a mom and stuff like that. So
yeah, wow. So you went through abuse from like your father mainly growing up, and then obviously like you had that one day that we'll talk about in a little bit. But so like growing up with your dad being someone who, most of us do, we look up to our dad, and we look up to our family members. We're like, you know, no matter what, it's a family member. Like, we have to do what they say. We can't say no. We are really raised to just like follow along with whatever happens. So do you remember that happening as a child, just being like, oh, well, it's my dad?
I remember thinking like, so I remember, I don't know, Kristen, if you're watching, hey, but I remember my best friend when I was in 6th grade, I remember actually sitting down and thinking like, oh my gosh, we haven't fought this month. So I remember thinking that I had to live in this constant state of chaos. And if it wasn't chaos, then I didn't feel like love, because I wasn't really sure what it was. And at the time, of course, I couldn't identify what that was, but it's something that sticks out to me now as I've done all this work and all of that. Like it stands out so clear to me, like knowing that's what I was going through, like chaos was love to me. And so I think that I've always been really introspective and really like, I'm really good at like looking at other people's situations and learning from them. So like with my mom, when she was around and stuff like that, like I remember learning all that I know about unconditional love from her. And to this day, like she'll always be that, like that person for me, right? And then I learned from all of the healthy women that were in my life and all of the healthy men. So I'm really like proud of that, because I feel like it's not always that way. Like oftentimes.
Yeah, to actually like learn, like to be like, hey, I actually want to take away the good things from people instead of necessarily like following after the traits that you were surrounded with too. Obviously, like you're surrounded with people who, especially like your dad, like they were abusing you, and so not taking those traits forward is amazing, because like sometimes it's like subconscious, right? Like sometimes like we don't even realize that this abuse is like staying with us in a different way, because abuse is like a chain, and until we break that chain, it continues in our families. Mm-hmm. And so just like to continue on your story, next would be you going to college, right, and doing your music at the radio, and then what happened that day?
So it was actually Halloween. So I have this really strange adversity to Halloween now. And actually, like, I realize now that they're all triggers. But for me, after it happened, I was like, oh, you know what's weird? Like the way that the light hit the tile, like that was really weird for me. Like I had all these different idiosyncrasies where I'd be like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Like I remember getting out of the car to go to the grocery store and I'd be like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. And it was because I was feeling triggered. And these were things that I had felt before, but yeah, until this all happened, I didn't know. So on Halloween day, I was married and my mother-in-law lived with us at the time. And she kind of had this like estranged brother that we didn't know much about. And he like showed up at our door one day and he was like, I just lost my job. I want to see the kids. And at the time I only had my 2 boys. Carson had just turned 1 and Vince was he was going to be 3 in a couple, like 6 months. And so they were both in their high chairs and like the Taylor Swift Red album had just come out or something. And so we were like jamming in the kitchen. I was like, yeah, we're like making lunch. It was a normal day. And and he knocked on the door. I want to see the kids. And I was like, I didn't know what to do. So I was like, okay. And he came in, he asked me to put my dog outside and, which I thought was weird. It's Sam.
Yeah.
He was barking and all that stuff. And Sam's not like that. So that was crazy. And, and so he got me to the point where we were just in my kitchen and, Vince had asked me like, hey, can I have some water? And so I walked past him to go get water. And for something in me told me like, you should not be walking past him. This is not safe. And I don't know what that was, but it was a feeling that I had. And so I listened to it, but I had to also do what was best for my family. So I called my mother-in-law and I was like, hey, your brother is here and this doesn't feel right. And she's like, can I talk to him? And so I hand the phone over, I go and get Vince's water and I come back and he then had my phone, which is not something I was even thinking of. That whole day, I was using my brain that whole day, except for maybe that moment. Yeah. And at one point I was walking past him and he shoved a gun in my side and told me that I needed to cooperate. And if I didn't cooperate, that things were going to go really bad for me. And I'm not scared of guns. I've never been scared of guns part of my dad's whole lifestyle was guns. So that was easy for me to like just kind of, I shouldn't say easy, but it was probably the easiest part of that day for me to take it from him and turn it around back on him. And he knocked it out of my hand and it went flying across the room. And from that point, it was just kind of this battle back and forth of like me trying to get up and like use whatever resources I had close to me, whether that be like the alarm panel that was across the way or try to get my phone back, like stuff like that. And none of that worked. And so he actually at one point pulled out like a ball gag out of his pocket and he was like, you're going to wear this and I'm going to take you to the bank and we're going to do all that. And I was like, no, we're gonna, you can just take the TV. You can take the stuff that, you know, is in the house, but you don't need to take anything from us or, you know, we don't need to go anywhere. We don't need to take the kids. Like, I remember I was constantly like bargaining with him. Mm-hmm. At one point he got really frustrated with me because I kept going for that alarm panel that was on the other side of the kitchen. And mind you, you guys, my kids were watching, right? So my whole motivation was to do everything I could to make sure his attention stayed on me and not on the kids because I didn't know what he was capable of. And at one point he got me down in front of the refrigerator and he tied, at the time I thought it was balloon string or like a shoelace or something. It ended up being women's nylon. So like the stuff that you'd put on your legs, which is super.
Yeah.
He tied it in my neck. And I believe in God. And I remember when all of this was happening, I remember just thinking to myself, like I felt like it was God's voice, right? Like saying to me, you need to relax because if you don't, you're going to die. And you just need to just kind of lean into this, right? And so I did. And I just completely like let peace wash over me. And then I was out unconscious for, I don't even know how long. And when I woke up, there was like some more battling and he didn't touch my kids. My kids were completely unscathed. He was like smoking spice in my kitchen and drinking a beer. And I just remember just watching in shock because he was making my kids laugh. And I was so discombobulated that I was like, what just happened? Like, okay, the kids are okay. And I remember I was trying to stand up actually to go, we had these elderly neighbors and they were always home. And we were in this house that has 2 houses. It's just a cul-de-sac and there's nobody else. So if the neighbors are always home, like that's my only recourse. And so I tried to stand up. I didn't know this until after it happened, but when you're obviously unconscious, you don't have control of your body the way that you normally would. I like tried to stand up, it didn't work. He came and tackled me and he's like, we're going to get the kids loaded and we're just going to get in the car and we're going to go. And I was like, we don't need to get the kids involved. And, you know, it was this back and forth thing. And he finally looked at me and said, if you don't cooperate, I'm going to kill you. And I was like, okay. Like everything in me was just like, okay, I'm just going to do what he says. So he told me that he had like opened the garage door while I was out. You know, he kept calling it sleeping. He was like, you were such a good girl. You went right to sleep. Such a creepy thing to say. I mean, all of it was terrible, but those are like triggers. When someone tells me I'm a good girl now, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to throw up everywhere. But yeah, so he's like, I opened the garage door. I want you to come with me. And I was like, you need to show me that it's open. I'm not just walking out there because I've seen Dexter. I know how this works. I was terrified. And he kept telling me to take the kids out. And I was like, no, we don't need to involve them. Whatever you need to do, you're just going to do to me. To make a long story short, we ended up just like carousing the neighborhood and stuff like that. And I finally got him to pull over. And I just looked at him and I was like, listen, like, we love you and we'll support you and we'll like do whatever we have to do as long as you let me live. Like those kids need me and I need you to just take me back to my house and I'll pretend this never happened. I'll never call the cops. Like I told him everything I thought he would need to hear. Yeah. And it worked. He started bawling and he took me back to my house. And there was a couple times on the way back where he was like, you know, he was sitting there and he'd be like, I can't drive you back. I have to get this finished. And I'm like, what are you going to finish? What are you going to do to me? You know? And when we were in the car, he had tackled me and tried to like get me into a headlock, and he was spraying spray paint in my face. And when he had me down, I was actually like using my feet to like unroll the windows of his car and try to open the door so I could slide out, because I was like, and I was touching everything. My hair was falling out, and I was like, I'm putting stuff everywhere because I knew if someone found a truck, like at least they would know that I was there, right?
Yeah.
So it was crazy, and I don't know how I thought of any of that in the moment, but my dad, I feel like the stuff that I went through with my dad got me to this point where I was sitting in this car with him, and I was like, these are all the things that are going to save my life.
Yeah.
And it did. It inevitably did. And I actually really thought that I wasn't going to call the police. Like, I really thought that I was just going to like let bygones be bygones and not do anything about it, because I didn't have a voice. That whole marriage, I didn't have a voice. With my mother-in-law, I didn't have a voice. And I just thought that that's what it would be. So I actually called my mom and my mom's watching. Hi. But I called my mom and I was like, you need to come get the kids. I'll explain everything later. And I was supposed to be at her house trick-or-treating with my little sisters. And we were supposed to be girls that were attacked by zombies, and we were going to have these crazy neck wounds. And so the way that the day panned out was just crazy. But my mom was within 8 minutes. And I called my dad right after, because he's always one of my first phone calls, even as terrible of the relationship we actually have. And he had, you know, his friends show up at the same time the police did. He's actually the one that called the police. And I'm actually best friends with the police officer that came to my door that day, because he stayed all night with me in the hospital, and he made sure that I was safe. He ended up going to court with me. And yeah, to make a long story really short, we ended up going to court for 2.5 years, and I won, and he got 25 years in prison. So it was crazy. It was the craziest time ever.
Yes. Craziest time ever. And I've absolutely heard the story. Every time I've heard the story, I'm always like, what? Just like your reaction in general, like, is so amazing. While yes, you said you didn't feel like you had a voice, like you had a voice in that situation. Like most people would have been terrified to have a gun, for one, would have, you know, been like not knowing what to do in those situations, not having those, like, you know, keeping the kids out of it, just being like, what do you want? What do you need here? Like, take it. And you know, like sometimes we don't know our reaction. Like you said, you're like, I watched Dexter. Like I thought I would know. And we think that, like, I think so often we think that we would know what we would do in situations. Like I would stand up for myself. I would run. I would say something. But until we've actually, unfortunately, been in those situations, it's really hard to know. And it's amazing that you did stand up for yourself in that. Well, and I don't know if it was like that.
What's crazy is I think back to that time, and I don't identify with that girl anymore, just in general. But I remember we were watching shows like that. We were watching like Dexter and Sons of Anarchy, and I remember getting mad at the shows, right? Because they always like somehow pulled the kids into it, and the kids were dealing with this insane trauma. And I was always like, what would we actually do if that happened in our lives, right? And then it did happen, and I was forced to, you know, face those things. And I remember like watching TV being so mad. And even now, like, that's one thing that I can't do. I have a really hard time watching some of those shows. Like we've tried to rewatch Dexter and stuff like that since, and I'm like, I can't do it. Like I can't bring myself to put myself back in that mentality, you know. But
yeah. So you went through that terrible day, and you were in the hospital for how long after?
Kept me overnight. So my cardiac enzymes were really high. They said that the likelihood was that my heart stopped, and that it was a miracle that I survived. And the police officer, Nick, who I was just talking about, he was actually just amazing that whole time. And he was always reminding me, he's like, you know, I deal with a lot of people, but you're an actual victim. Like, you were a victim of this crime, and it actually happened to you. And he really helped, you know, convince me that what I was going through was real, because I feel like I was so disconnected from it at that time. But
you said that you weren't even going to call the police originally, because you're just like, you know what, let's just forget this happened. And you said that to him, but you're probably just saying that in the moment to get yourself out of the situation. But then you're like, actually, I was actually thinking about not saying anything. So like, what went through your mind of like not thinking that you had to say something? Like, is it something that you're like, well, this happened and it's over, or what was going through your mind?
I think that after dealing with what I had dealt with growing up, like, because my dad's thing was always like, oh, well, I didn't hit you in the face, so it couldn't be that bad. That was always his thing. And then, so I feel like, since I got to walk away from that alive, I feel like, what happened was I was just like, well, you know what, I'm alive, so why is it even a big deal? Like, I survived it and I got the kids out of it, and why, like, I shouldn't make a big deal of it. And I didn't want to cause problems between my ex and his family and all of that. And I knew the second, the second I went to court, it shoved a wedge between me and his entire family. And that relationship was already super bad anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's where my mentality was. Like, I just didn't think that I was strong enough to do it and like see it through.
Yeah. And yeah, 80% of women don't actually tell anybody because for one, they take it on as their problem. They say that, like it was my fault. I should have done something. I shouldn't have, and there's so many things in your story, Alli, that like most women might have said like, oh, I shouldn't have let him in the door, and battling those discussions in your head. But it's like, you don't know what you do until you got into those situations. And on top of that, like he was a family member. And so like, can you just touch on like the sense of like, well, like I feel uncomfortable around him, but he is family, right? How many times have our listeners, how many times have people said that? It's family.
This is one of those things too, where I go back to feeling voiceless because my whole stance on the relationship with him was like, I didn't want him when I wasn't there. I didn't feel comfortable with him around the kids. Like, I did have like these certain things, but I never thought that it would come into fruition, right? Like, I knew who he was, but I didn't know him well enough to know that anything could go past what it was. So it actually turns out that he had a previous case against him, and he had been in jail that he had done time for. And it was very similar to what he had done to me. And it was in front of children and stuff, which is why I ended up getting the 25 years, because we were able to use some of that, which is, I mean, it's sad, but it was good that it happened that way. Right. But yeah. And like, whenever you have those feelings, you have to listen to them. Like, they're innate in you because something is wrong, Yeah. And even if you look like a fool, like, you have to make sure that you speak your mind and you stand up for yourself, right? And I tried that so hard, but he's still.
You didn't try. You actually did. Like, you don't get to say that you tried because you actually did.
I mean, I had said I didn't want him around. So, that's the part where I'm like, I can only do so much, but
no one can, and someone once said like, no one can prevent an attack or an abuse besides the abuser himself. And that's like the sad reality. At the same time, we get to know that there are things that we can do to stand up for ourselves afterwards. There are things we can stand up during it and before, teaching our children how to say no to even family members, all those things that I want to cover in a little bit, because I know you have 3 beautiful children and you have stood up for them day in and day out. And so really like about your story as well, is that you did have a husband at the time, right? So it was his relative. And so can we just like talk about a little bit about that situation and maybe like how you said you felt voiceless even in your marriage. And so that kind of, you said like you didn't really feel like you had a voice even when that relative had come to the door.
Yeah. So I think that it's just something where I didn't have any of the decision-making responsibility in that relationship. I didn't have control over the finances. I didn't have control of where my money went when I came home from work or whatever the situation was. So when I did stand up for something, he would always be like, oh, you're overreacting. Like, this isn't, and he didn't go to court with me. He went to court with me one day out of the, I don't know. One of my very best friends went to court with me every single time I had a date. And she like held me together during that time. And she would always be like, squeeze my hand. Like, I'm squeezing your hand harder. And I don't know why, but I remember they were trying to get us to sign a plea deal for, 10 or 15 years. I can't remember. And I was like, no, like, my minimum is 20 or, whatever. And I was like, that's what we're getting. And I'm putting my foot down. Like, that's what we're getting. And I remember my ex looking at me and being like, you're being so greedy. Like, why? Like, just take what you can get and let's be done. And I was like, you can go sit in the car because this has to happen this way, or otherwise, you know, I'm serving justice for our family. You know, I didn't understand that. It was until this happened that I even had the power to do that, because there was no other point in that relationship that I could have been like, no, this is how it's going to be, because I didn't have control over anything. Not that I need control, but you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. You do get to have that control, and really like realizing that like he wasn't there for you before, but in this circumstance, like going through abuse and not having someone stand there with you and believe you and know that like you deserve to have that love and time to heal is so, so hard. And like I said before, like, you know, like 80% of people aren't even believed. And so like afterwards, the healing journey is lonely sometimes. And you can feel like you're on your own. And like you said, you had that friend who held your hand. But really, like, let's transition into like what were the days like afterwards? What were the weeks like? How are you here? Like, how are you alive and how are you doing so well now?
By the grace of God, I don't know. I've always said this, and I continue to say this to this day, but I am blessed by people. Like, I have some of the best people in my, like, my closest friends. They're all like, they're my rocks, right? Like, they just get me through. But there was a time that I just wanted to lay in bed. And like, that's one of my biggest things. When I'm like laying in bed too much, I'm like, okay, I'm depressed and I need to work through this. And when I was going through that, actually what triggered it in my marriage, like going back to that, what triggered me even thinking this was I woke up one night like out of a dead sleep, and he was on his Xbox reading this blog that I started that just have like a bunch of my feelings post assault. And and he was sitting on the couch talking to his brother through the Xbox, and they were making fun of my blog. And I was like, I'm planning a trip and I'm going to do something for myself. And mind you, I couldn't get gas by myself. I was constantly on the phone with somebody because I was like, I'm going to get attacked again. I just know it. And like, it was just all sorts of crazy for me. And so I just started doing stuff for myself. So it started by me taking little trips. And then like my soul sister is a country singer, and she had asked me to go on a radio tour with her. And during that trip, her husband was like, you need to make a decision on Anthony. And I was like, he was like, you know, kind of pushing me in that direction. And I was like, I wasn't ready yet, you know, and so I was uncomfortable, and it caused something in me to be like, okay, these trips are great, but what's the next step? Like, I had to do something else. And I had worked through so much through I had worked through so much through like music and like self therapy. Like, every therapist or coach I've ever worked with has been like, you don't even need me. Like, just they're like, you get there by yourself. You just need to talk about it, and you just need someone to back you up. And I'm like, that's not true. I feel like I need someone to tell me that like this is right, you know. But so I keep going. I keep showing up because I have to. And I feel like that's the thing. Like, those days that it was really hard, like I threw on Andy Grammer Lunatic and I just like got through the day. And I have it tattooed on my arm.
Like, turned me into Andy Grammer, like biggest fan ever. Like, even before the interview, I was like playing the work song. I was like, yeah,
you guys, it's fine.
Everyone needs to be introduced to him, because so throughout that time, like, yes, like what's amazing is when you said that, like, everyone noticed that you could do things on your own, is that like, yes, because you went through that abuse as a child too, and you grew up fast, Alli, and that's what happens when you go through abuse, is like you have so much years of growing up in your childhood that necessarily you wouldn't have if you haven't had gone through something that painful. And so what's crazy is like, yes, you could have done it on your own, but we are still not meant to do life on our own. And really, like, what your friend and everyone was pushing you to do was to take that stand for yourself. Because I think, like, did you feel like you had a mask on of being busy and going on these tours and being like okay in a sense, or did you feel like you had that mask on?
Yes and no. So there was like part of me that I felt really like being home was really hard, because obviously it happened in the house, right? So I feel like part of me wanting to get out so much was really just stemming from the fact of like, it was hard to be home. Like I said in the beginning, like the way the light hit the tile. And then there were a lot of different scent triggers. And I learned that actually it was like my memory that would bring these smells into my brain, and it wasn't even something that anyone else could smell, because I would just stand there in the kitchen and be like, can you guys smell him, because I can smell him. And so it used to affect me really bad, and I couldn't even walk down the grocery store aisle if there was a guy at the end of the aisle. And I've never had a problem like this before. Like I've always been pretty confident, you know, I can walk with my shoulders back and just, you know, power on. But there were days that I would leave a full cart and grab both boys and just book it out of the store because I couldn't do it. And so those days were hard. And like I said, I would throw on an Andy Grammer song and go to the next store, and I would just try again, because if I wasn't trying again, then I wasn't going to be able to get anything done.
I love that. Oh my goodness. Yes. I can't believe you like went to the next store. You're like, okay, this was a trigger, and you acknowledged it, and you got out of that trigger and like removed yourself from that like situation. And then you're like, but I don't get to give up, and I don't get to just like not get groceries. I don't get to just not do these things that I have to do.
There were times that I drove completely on empty from like, you know, South Phoenix, where the radio station was, all the way to, you know, the Northwest Valley, where I was like, nope, not stopping, because if I stop, you know, someone's going to kill me. It was in my head all the time that someone was just out to get me. So,
Wow.
I mean, it's just real. So there were times that I couldn't stop, but yeah.
Yeah. I can't even imagine having to have that fear of, because a lot of times when you go through abuse, you have that fear that you're going to attract someone who's going to abuse you. And I'm sure that you also had that fear too, just in a relationship wise, as friendship wise, but like really like you're talking about your triggers. It's like, when do you feel like you kind of started to stand up to those triggers and started to heal through those? And what did you do? Like, how did you deal with those triggers in the first place?
So I feel like it came in phases. Like at first it just started with music and like traveling and doing that kind of stuff. Like I remember when I traveled to LA for the first time to go see Andy by myself, and I was like rooftop LA, like listening to him play an acoustic performance, you know, and doing all that stuff. And those were all times that helped me get to like the next level. And so I look at it almost like that, as like levels. And then I was like, okay, there's certain things that I can't deal with on my own. And I didn't know where they were coming from. Like I would like things popped up, like having a fear of abandonment, or, you know, constantly being scared that the next thing was going to happen, you know, not like I don't like to be alone in the middle of the night, like, you know, things like that. And so those were all things that I worked with a therapist and a coach. Like I had she calls herself a transformational life coach. Her name is Brittany. And she like hypnotized me to make sure that like, you know, some of this stuff would go back down, or, you know, I could work through it or whatever. And so there were a lot of different phases, but it's ongoing, and it's still ongoing. And like, you know, in my current relationship, like there's been stuff that's popped up, and I put myself in a 12-step program because I was like, I need to make sure that I'm healthy enough, you know, to continue on, because if I'm not, you know. So then I created a group of friends there, and we all started healing together and doing these art nights and doing all these phenomenal things. And we do like art healing, and I like, so it's just always been like one thing after another. Like it's a continuous journey for me. And I've been working on, like, we were talking today, like the reparenting and like the inner child work and all of that. So all of that is kind of continuous for me, and I'll keep doing that until I feel like I'm settled.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I always tell it like to everybody, like the healing journey, it's not a healing sprint. And so like you going through these like different things and still working on some things is not unusual. And sometimes like we can get really down on ourselves, being like, why am I still healing? It's like, and I don't know if you've heard this, Alli, but I know, I'm sure you have, because unfortunately in our society today, people, you know, don't understand like speaking up, and don't understand that abuse takes time healing sometimes. And so they say things like, hey, Alli, why are you still talking about it after 8 years? Have you heard that?
Yeah, I heard that from day one from my ex and his family, and I still hear it to this day. Yeah. So
like, what do you feel like when people say that? Like, how do you respond now, like versus like how you responded before? Because I know that our listeners have absolutely had someone come to them and tell them that they shouldn't keep talking about it, that they should be over it by now, all those things.
Well, so when it first happened, I talked about it a lot, and I talked about it with people that were close to me. I had, you know, I have a very big group circle of, like a huge circle of friends. And so I constantly was having people over to like talk to them and make sure that I was like building like safety nets around myself. And I feel like that's kind of like, I don't know. I remember my ex just telling me like, you need to stop talking about it because you're making it worse. And I think you're just looking for attention. And I remember and I was like, if I wanted attention, I would find something different. But what I'm like, I didn't talk about it on social media. Like, this is what I do for work. And I wasn't talking about it on social media. I was, you know, hey, this kind of happened. And I was really vague. And I was like, I can't go to the grocery store, whatever. Like, but I wasn't being myself. And so I think that journey kind of just, there was the slow build that I'm talking about to where I was finally just like, I'm going to keep talking about this. And then recently, when I restarted my marketing business, because I did take a little break, I was like, no, like I'm going to continue to stand in this because I know that it's going to support other people. And nobody's going to tell me that I can't own my story, even if they're in it. And if they wanted me to talk about them better, then they would have treated me better and it would have been different. That's how I feel about that.
Yeah, right there, like mic drop, because absolutely, like after like going through abuse and telling your story, like it can be really hard to share it. And sometimes, like you said, you said you like downplayed it almost, like when you talk about like, oh yeah, I can't go to the grocery store anymore, and like almost made it not as serious as it was. So like, when did you feel like you really started being like, no, this is my story. I get to share it on the rooftops, and I'm not going to stop sharing about this because this topic needs to be talked about, because so many women have gone through similar things, Alli, as you and I have, and they aren't willing to talk about it. So when was that moment where you're like, not stopping?
Hi to my sister who just came on, by the way. But she came to court with me too. So I feel like all the people that were there, I'm like, I just want to hug all of them. But honestly, I feel like that moment probably just started when I was sharing my story to women. Like I would stand in a group of 4 or 5 women and I would be like, so I was assaulted, and I would say it just like that. And it's almost like when people refer to like before Christ and after Christ, I'm always like, so before I was assaulted and after I was assaulted, because it's been different, like, yeah. And so I would be like, I was assaulted, and I'd start telling my story, but I always found that there was either 1 or 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5 other people that would come to me and be like, didn't want to say it in the group, but this is what happened to me. And I felt like there was like unity in that. And as soon as I felt that, I just kept talking about it because there was no way that I could be quiet about it at that point.
Yes. Oh, okay. I mean, I can't agree more. Like that's my whole program, is like, we do not have to do this alone. And wait, what?
That's why we mesh so well.
Yeah, and that's exactly like why Alli and I like have come together, and we're going to stay together and do more and more and more together, because like, yes, like we truly believe that you don't have to do this on your own, and that the healing journey does not have to be a lonely journey. And so often afterwards, like which is so amazing that you have those friends, because I remember like disconnecting from everyone. I was like, oh, and granted, mine didn't happen from like 11 to 13 from a family member. I was really young and I just disassociated from the whole thing. And so like I didn't have those friends, and I would always have lots of friends, but I didn't have close friends. So like, would you say that you still were able to have meaningful relationships after abuse? And how did you start having actually like romantic relationships again after everything?
Okay, so I have been the type of person to have deep and meaningful relationships like my entire life. Like I feel like people have said to me like, oh, you could be a love addict or whatever. And I'm like, I probably could, but I don't feel like it's an issue, right? Like, I don't feel like I did it so bad that it like affects my daily life. But the thing is that I constantly surround myself with people who, my favorite question is always like, how can I support you? And I'm sure that you've heard me say that before. Everybody in my friend group has heard me say that.
Are you saying you just
like an hour ago? Yeah. So like that, and like I've always said things like, I'm gonna love you through this, like whatever, like we're gonna get through this together. And so I feel like just already having those deep and meaningful relationships of like people that I could rely on my whole life, because a lot of my friends have been friends with me since I was little, like and the people that I love, like I hold on to forever. So like even ex-boyfriends and stuff, I'm like, we're still good, we're still friends, and that's just how I'll always be, because once I love you, I can't not love you, right? Unless you're my ex, and then my ex-husband, and then
he's cut, yeah, not makes sense.
He got kicked off the boat a while ago.
Yeah, which is amazing. It's amazing that you took that stand for yourself. And then so as far as like having another like romantic relationship, like how was it like getting back into having a romantic relationship? I know that can be really hard after abuse.
Something that was important to me. So I talked with a lot of friends about it. I did a lot of time, like I spent a lot of time, I didn't do a lot of time. I spent a lot of time, dating and like talking to friends and watching my healthy friends in their relationships and seeing what that looked like. And I actually made a list of 100 things that I wanted. And I was like, the first person to show up at my door that has all of this, I'm going to marry the crap out of him. And
pressure. There's 100 things.
I remember we were on a date and I was like, okay. Like, and I was like, do you feel like you identify with any of these? Like,
oh my gosh, please.
Yeah.
That's so amazing to like, and you would probably recommend that to anybody to actually like sit down and sit with yourself and be like, hey, what do I want in a relationship? And I get to have those things in a relationship, because sometimes we're like, that's for everybody else. After abuse, it's sometimes like, like you said, like you had gone through it as a child and then you ended up having that assault, and even in your past like marriage, that you were like, oh, well, I've gone through this a lot and this is kind of how I deserve to be treated. And so like, when did you start, like realizing that like, yes, you get to make a list and you get to stick to it? And like, how did you stand up for yourself in this relationship?
I mean, so I'm still like learning, right? I don't think that I'm perfect at this yet, but even like something that you said to me when you were about to do your interview with Eric, you're like, do you have any questions for Eric and I? And I love that you ask those kind of things, but I was like, just make sure that people know that relationships are not just a walk in the park. Like they're not supposed to be easy, but they're not supposed to be hard necessarily either. Right? So like if it's too hard or there's too much emotional toxicity floating around, like that's not good. But I feel like just knowing that like hard times are normal and like overcoming them is what it's about, and working as a team. And I always say this to John, I'm always like, it's us against the problem. It's not us against each other. And if we're fighting, like, I'm just going to laugh at that because it's not worth it.
No. Literally, Eric and I do that too. Sometimes we start like laughing. We're like, why are we even fighting about this? It's just like, and so like I love that you asked me that, and I love that you told me that on the interview. And I strive for that every single day. And I ask my audience like what they want to hear, because like I'm an open book, and so are you. Because the world needs honesty. The world needs like people just showing up authentically as themselves. And like you said, in a relationship, yes, exactly. Like we are not perfect. We are two human beings coming together and making it work, and making it not just work, even better than work, having an amazing relationship. But that does take time, and that does take communication. And I always thought it's like, if they're willing to talk about it, if they're willing to work on some things that maybe have been hard for you in the past, then amazing. Keep working on them, keep talking. But if that's not the case, and if you have noticed in your relationship like that people aren't willing to even like work on it, and they're not willing to understand your feelings and understand like, yes, you have gone through abuse, and so sometimes these triggers still come up, and that they're not willing to sit through the pain with you sometimes, then they get to go.
Yeah. And I think that's how I view even like friendships, right? Because there's times where I'm like, hey, I'm pulling you into the mud with me because I need you here with me. And if you can pull that, then it's fine. We can like have coffee afterwards. But I feel like the people that want to be in the trenches with you will be in the trenches with you. And they'll be fighting for you. Like my girlfriend that went to court with me, like I said, she would be like, I'm holding your hand and squeezing it and it's changing colors and you're just sitting there and being strong for me. She's like, it's time for you to have a breakdown. I'm like, I don't need one yet.
Yeah, we're like, oh, it's coming, but it's not yet. Yeah. And so would you just like say that like, since you stood up for yourself and you had that like more confidence come back to you, and confidence is something you have to work at, and we've talked about this before, like it's not just like every day you show up and you're like, I'm so confident, that was easy. It's like, no, you gotta do things every morning. Like, so do you want to even share like what me and you even like post, or like we text back and forth every single morning? Because I think that'd be supportive.
To at this point, because we have to. But yeah, so I started doing that with my my group of friends from the 12-step program, actually, and that's where I picked up on it, but was having that accountability, right? To like send each other back and forth, like, this is what I'm grateful for and stuff like that. And I actually make my kids do it now too, which is awesome. And of course, I'm not like, send me 12 things, but I'm always like, tell me something you're grateful for. And it's great because it's evolved over time. Like my son, like Carson would start and he'd be like, oh, I'm thankful for my transformer. And then it you know, it evolved into, you know, now when he asks for Christmas presents, he's like, um, I don't want anything for Christmas. I just want joy this year. I just want us to all be happy. And I'm like, I love you.
I heard you ask this the other day on the phone call when we were talking. You're like, and he was like, this home,
Yeah.
and I was like, yes. Like, what kid is like really understands like that a home is such an amazing place to be. And so we haven't even like talked about your kids yet. And the interview is almost like, you know, we've talked all day. So that. Yeah, I know. I was like, guys, are you good with a 5-hour interview? Like, how does this work? Like, are you staying on with us or not? No, but so let's just go ahead and talk about like how you, the reparenting, yes, like, and I would love to talk about that, but let's just focus on your kids for a second and how you showed up for your kids during the time that you were clearly healing, during the time you were going through court and all of that. So how did you show up for your 3 beautiful children?
Thank you. Yeah. So that was really hard. That was probably like the hardest part of the battle that I went through. And there's a song called Soldier, and it like sums up how I feel about being a mom. And it's like, get on my back and I'm just going to carry you with me. And that's how I felt. Like, I felt like I was just like walking through it, and I had to do it, and they had to be there for it. So there was no way that I wasn't going to share it with them. And there was no way that I was going to be like, oh, mommy's not crying in the closet while eating bonbons. Like, no, I don't eat bonbons, but you know, like I had to find a way to share it with them that was like, you know, acceptable for me and responsible for me, right, to share with them. So I was always like, you know, I have this to do today and I'll talk to you about it later. And I just had real open conversations with them because I had to. There's no other way. Like, there's no other way around it. And even now, like, I still do checks with them where I'll be like, so back up here, like during court process and like when I was in the hospital, they didn't do a rape kit on me. And they didn't do it because they were like, you would have felt it. If you were raped, you would have felt it. And I was like, well, that's not always freaking true. You don't always feel sex or whatever. And so that's like one thing that I'm really adamant about with my kids is like, you know, just making sure that they know what's appropriate and stuff like that. So if people come to them and want to do things with them and it's not appropriate, they know. And my kids have really good boundaries. If they don't want to give you a hug, they're not going to give you a hug. And that's not something to take personal. It's just something that if they're not you know, and it's actually come up in situations before where people get offended. And I'm like, it's not you, right? It's their level of comfortability. And that's what matters to me as a mom.
Can you like, just like touch on that? Like, again, like, hey, your kids and like, Alli, like, does this like even apply to you? Like, if they don't want you to like give them a hug, they don't want you to tickle them, like, do you keep doing it when they say no?
I think there's like levels, right? Like if don't tickle me, I know, of course I'm gonna, but yeah, I do. I take their boundaries serious, and I am the most like, I'm the world's most annoying and most affectionate mom. Like, I want you to come sit with me and I want you to cuddle with me and all that, you know. And I'm always like that, but I do. And I definitely listen to what they say. And so much so that like when I go to make big decisions in life, like I sit down and I talk to them about it. And even like I had some health stuff pop up recently, like within the last 6 months. And I was like, I'm not going to tell them this. And then I'm like, no, we need to have the conversation, because if it's happening, they need to be in the know. And that's just like, I don't ever want them to grow up and be like, mom didn't tell us anything. I had no idea what was going on. I want them to look back and be like, she might have shared it, but she didn't overshare, or she didn't, you know.
Which like, so for an example, like I've seen you with your kids and your kids love you. Like, they want to hang out with you 24/7. Like, what kids want to hang, you know, it's like, so like, obviously like you having those hard conversations with them did not scare them away from you, did not scare them away from hard topics, did not scare them in general. And I think sometimes like we get scared that the kids are going to be fearful their whole life and you know, not want to leave the house and scared. And it's like, no, it's not scaring them. It's preparing them for life so that they can say no. And so they know these healthy boundaries. So can you just like point on that, like just how you even like had those conversations really? How did you even tell your kids like what's appropriate and what's not appropriate?
I think I just look at the situation, and because my kids are who they are, I'm able to judge. Like, I just know them really well. It goes kind of like with their bedtime routine. This is something that's so silly to me, but like, I know that like Avery really wants me to go in there and cuddle with her and rub her back. I know that Carson hates cuddling, but he wants me to like massage his back, right? And then I know that Vince just wants me to cuddle with him. So it's even like fine-tuned down to that, where it's like I know what their needs are, and I know like walking into a situation like how I'm going to handle it. And so I know that women especially have like, especially if they've been through trauma, like I know that they have these like boundaries and these walls, and sometimes it's really hard even with their kids to like let that down. But it's just something to me that was always important, because even though my dad was a jerk growing up, he still raised me like I didn't ever not hear I love you. And I think that that's just really powerful. And one of my really good friends died when I was 15, and the last thing I said to her on the phone was I love you. And so I think through all of that, just, you know, I think that like shaped me, right? Like I think that I think about it all the time. Like if I'm walking away from someone, I always want them to know how I feel about them. And that's just, you know, the same way with the kids. And that structures everything that goes on in my life. Yeah. Literally everything. So all of those conversations with my kids stem that way.
Yeah, which is amazing. Like, especially in this time right now that like there's a lot of uncertainty in the world and all the stuff going on in the world. Like we need to show up for the people in our lives that matter to us and humans in general, and show up and show love, be honest and open with them, and have these hard conversations, because I think that we've tried to not have these conversations, not you personally, Alli, obviously you've had these hard conversations, and we think they're hard. I mean, they don't have to be hard. Like you said, like you just have these like open conversations with them so that they are prepared, and so they know how to have these things. And so like we could literally talk about parenting forever, because you're an amazing mom. But I also do want to just talk a little bit about like how you are, and you know, yes, we could talk all day, and I understand. The interview has been already 45 minutes, and so we're gonna cut off soon. But last two questions actually I have for you. So how are you like reparenting yourself? Because I think that's really important to talk about, because a lot of people have gone through a childhood and everything that maybe wasn't what they want to do now. And so how did you start that?
That's something that is new to me, actually. So within the last like year and a half is when I really started diving down into that, because it's something that was completely like, it was mind blowing to me when I first heard about it. And so now like just the whole idea of it is like looking back, like when things flare up for you. So when I'm, you know, in my current relationship or in a friendship or something, when I start to take something personal, I'll be like, okay, this is a red flag, and why is it a red flag? So I'll like look at it, and then I'm not always good at it. Like I said, I'm still learning. I have a long way to go, but I'm able to look at it and be like, okay, what does like the little girl that lives inside me, like, what does she need to hear? What is she like, what affirmations do I need to tell myself to help me get through this like moment of insecurity? Because it just happens. It happens. I feel like it happens to all of us, but someone close to me was like, you know, you need to name that little girl that's in you, right? Like you just need to name her. So, and you literally picture her living outside of your body and like talking to her. And I was like, this sounds insane. Like at first I was like, no way, I'm not doing that. Like you can't make me. But once I started doing it, it was really powerful. So I always loved the Titanic when I was little. So I had a thing for the name Rose. And I always loved the name Elizabeth, which is funny because Avery loves the name Susie now. And I'm like, we're just like 90-year-old women trapped in this body.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
Yeah. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to name her Elizabeth Rose, because hearing those two names together makes me think of being a kid. And whatever. So once I started like having these conversations with myself, I don't talk to myself out loud or anything. If I did, you guys can think I'm crazy. That's fine. But yeah, having those internal conversations and that internal dialogue and being like, you know what, you're worthy, you're powerful, you are loved. And like, you know, if people leave you, it's not your fault. Like just having those like hard moments where you're like looking in the mirror and you're like, okay, tell me what, you know, tell me what I need to hear. And just, yeah. So that's basically what reparenting has been for me. Like I said, I have a long way to go, but it's been transformational to say the least.
Yeah, and I would encourage you to say it out loud. And yeah, well, who cares if you sound crazy? Because actually, like the power of saying things out loud is so freeing and healing. And I think oftentimes, like it's hard for us to say the nice things about ourselves, anyways, sometimes. And to actually say it out loud is so powerful. So like I actually teach my clients to look in the mirror. Eventually, like I don't, you know, it's like not something that maybe you feel comfortable doing right away, but eventually to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, I am powerful, I am confident. And even if you don't feel confident that day, you can say, I am working on being confident. Like those actionable words, like, yes, that's who you get to show up for. And you get to say it out loud because there's a power in saying it out loud. There's a power in writing it to pen and paper. And so yeah, I get on to you all the time about that.
You get a journal, calm down.
She always text it to me and I'm like, no, write it down. I'm like, pen and paper, let's do this. So
the cover, it's really pretty.
Okay, so yes, I will see it tomorrow then, right? Awesome. So I know your friends asked a lot of questions, and I think we did cover most of them. Let me just look through here. We talked about your kids and how you process that with your kids. And everyone who asked like these questions from Alli, like I love it. She sent me all of them, and so thank you so much for doing that. I hope we answered a lot of these. And obviously, we're gonna have to talk to Alli again because Alli and I can talk forever, and we haven't even gotten to like all of the juicy stuff.
Try to hear phone call of ours because they're never just 5 minutes.
I know. It is hard to actually wrap it up for us. So, question, just to wrap this interview up, unfortunately, what are like some things that you would tell the audience right now if they have gone through abuse and maybe they're just starting this healing journey? Like, what are 3 things that they can start doing right away?
Well, I know this like super good abuse coach. Her name is Alisha. But really, yeah, she's gonna pay me after the show. Just kidding. But honestly, working with a professional, whether that's a therapist or a coach or whatever, like just find someone, even if it's just like your pastoral team at church, like just work with somebody that will hear you out and be unbiased. Oftentimes, like we tell people in our closest circle, and that's not always the safest place to talk to people, I feel like. Especially if you are going through something that is, you know, family or friend oriented. So yeah, find a safe person and talk to them. That's what I would say first and foremost. But also like the power of people and just listening to yourself. I think those are like my 3 things. Like there's a power in creating your own family and support group. Like if you don't have a family, build your own. That's all I have to say about that. Just build your own. Like I am constantly talking about yeah. I'm constantly talking about having like my core group of friends, but really like they're family to me, you know? And then, yeah, listening to yourself because it's so valuable to actually like act on your intuition. Like if something feels off, it probably is off for a reason. And you need to do yourself the favor and listen to why it's off.
Yes. Just like listening to yourself, like you had that feeling even when you walk by him and even like that day at the door, like you had those feelings and sometimes we ignore them to be polite, to be nice, but that stops today. We're giving you permission to stand up and take a stand for yourself. And actually I have one more question for you. What is your biggest contribution to the world?
Holy crap. You didn't even.
I knew you would hate it if I told you this question earlier. Like, and so, because Alli is the most amazing social media lady I've ever met. And not only because like I connect with her with abuse, like she shows up powerfully and keeps me accountable to my goal of posting and to showing up for you guys and doing all this stuff. It's like Alli's been so important in my life. And sometimes Alli doesn't like to brag about herself. And all of us can probably relate to that because it's not always easy. So what is your biggest contribution to the world, Alli? You're really kidding me. You're like, tomorrow, you're like, I'm actually going to
walk away. Just kidding. My biggest contribution, I would say, has nothing to do with work and has everything to do with the way I love people. I think that if I could just say that I had one thing to give to people, it would be that. And because I just love the crap out of so many people. And I think that that's really powerful. And I think love does not solve all of the problems, but I think it starts. I think it starts there. And once someone feels love, they can completely transform. And so I think that's what's good about like your program or having a community. Like the reason that you feel confidence to do things sometimes is because someone else believes in you. Like there's a point where it can go from, codependency, like you're relying on someone for your self-confidence or whatever, but it can also just be a really powerful thing to be like, you know what, I'm showing up today because Alicia's counting on me, even though I don't want to be there today, like I'm going to do it. And I think that like love is just like what binds us, you know? So I feel like if I had a contribution, it would be that one.
And I would agree, because I feel so loved by you every single day, and it helps me wake up every day with even more of a purpose to serve women.
Contribution.
My biggest contribution, Alli, I'm interviewing you, and so you're gonna have to interview me someday, and I'll answer that.
Okay.
My biggest contribution, like I actually had someone ask me this on the interview, like that was like 6 or 7 months ago now, and I just remember being like, wow, like what is my biggest contribution? And really, like my biggest contribution is taking a stand for women who've gone through abuse, and I get to do that every single day. And it's amazing, because like you said, like we all have different callings. And so like Alli, like you have an amazing story of an abuse, and who knows where that's going to take you someday. Like you've already supported me, you've supported so many people around you, but you're doing social media right now. Like that's your calling right now, and it's so amazing. And so how can people get a hold of you if they're like, hey, I would love help, like, and have a beautiful Instagram like Alisha has now. How can they get a hold of you, and how can they just reach out? And honestly, guys, like if Alli is an amazing person just to connect with anyways, if it's not just social media, yes, you should hire us for social media, but also just get to know Alli. You have two. You have your private, or not your private, you have your Alli page, and then you have your Let's Get Social page. So
it's funny you said that. Yeah, you can follow, like you can find me on here on Facebook, but also my personal Instagram is ms.allip, and then my professional Instagram is at Let's Get Social Official.
Awesome. Perfect. Yep. I'm gonna tag all these guys, so don't worry about like we missed it. And
the only opportunity, so
yeah, it's done, like it's over. It's your only opportunity. So sorry guys. She's strict. Like she's strict on me on my social media, and she's strict on these interviews apparently. So so awesome, Alli, interviewing you. Thank you so much for showing up for others in so many different ways, but even sharing your story tonight was so powerful, and it really impacted me, and I know it impacted all of these viewers. Yeah, any last things?
Thank you for showing up for how many women you show up for on a daily basis, because I see how hard you're working from the front side and from the back side. Like, I just think that what you're doing is amazing, and your mission is so awesome. And I'm not even like necessarily in your program, and I'm learning from you, and you're pushing me to do better. So I can't imagine how the girls in your program feel, because I already feel a world different, and I think it shows. So I love you, and I adore you so much.
People get friends like Alli and I, and you get to have community, and you get people in your life like this. So go find it. Don't make excuses.
I'm matching hair like Alisha and I. So
yeah, I know you might have thought we were sisters. Love you so much. Have an awesome night, and thank you guys for listening. Bye. Bye.